All the way from the start, I can feel it in my heart, like all the way from the start.
Hey, what's going on out there? I'm Sean Devine. Hope you all are doing well. Today's video is by request. We're going to be talking about how to master an album or an EP like a pro. So just to preface, this is not a video about, general mastering for just a single song. If you are interested in just the mastering process in that way, I'll put some links below so that you can dive into that and then come back to this. This is about creating a cohesive sound and a consistency in terms of level, in terms of tonality and frequency, and also just really fine-tuning things so that our entire project is going to have, a similar aesthetic, and it's going to make the most consistent listening experience. The first thing we want to consider here is consistency in terms of level. So I'm not going to get into too much detail about these quote standards out here in terms of LUFS integrated, -14, -15. I will just say that these are not necessarily what you want to deliver your master at in terms of level. These are just how it's going to play back if normalization is active on some of the streaming platforms. You want to focus more on how do you want someone to be hearing this if they download the file? So if they get it from like iTunes or Amazon MP3 or whatever, you want this to sound the way that you intend in terms of level, which means it needs to be able to compete commercially. First things first, let's just say that in terms of level, I have a song here that is going to be, kind of the baseline that I want to center the rest of the project around in terms of LUFS integrated. So let's just play this back. And I'm just going to go ahead and tell you this album was mastered at a integrated LUFS level between -9 and -10. So let's just take a listen and a look here. Keep an eye on our long-term integrated.
My flow is off the wall. Yeah. Your flow, y'all trip off some triplets, and I get this. It was a freestyle, I went back and ripped it. I swear this was purely off the top, but I speak from my heart, and we did it since the start. Every day I'm in here working hard, trying to bring some value to your home.
So anyways, it's saying -10 integrated, but if I was to let it play through the entire song, this is at around -9. And that's where I wanted the rest of the songs to be. So what I'm going to do is I would just go through and make sure that each of the other tracks as we go to them.
But they don't know what I feel, driven by the truth that's inside of me. Doubt take me through the fire, woke up in cold sweats. She whispers I equate to nothing, but we all know you're up. We can get away, it's so fluid.
General rule of thumb here in terms of loudness consistency is I try to get all of the tracks in a project not to deviate from one another more than about 1 loudness unit or 1.5 loudness units in terms of LUFS integrated. And I just find that in terms of loudness across the project, that's going to give you a really consistent sort of sound. So just match those up in terms of LUFS integrated. Again, I got all these to be between -9 and -10, somewhere in there, so that, we're not dancing around in terms of loudness as the listener is going through the project. The second thing that we want to consider in terms of creating a cohesive master for an album is we want to consider the tonality of each of the songs, and we want to match that tonality. So there's a couple of different things that you can do that'll really help you with this process, but most importantly, just use your ears. And as you're kind of going between songs, I like to keep an eye on a frequency analyzer. So if you want to jump in here to a plugin, or I like to use the Clarity M, and then just listen and look and just kind of see that the low end, shouldn't be dramatically louder on one song than the other. The high end shouldn't be dramatically brighter than another song. So just going through them and playing back, keeping an eye on that.
Complicated, heavily abbreviated. I'm so glad you waited, even when we make it. Never graduated, we just stepping up a flow. All you looking for is the dough. I got both feet going through the flow. Love this music daily, know I give a damn about award shows. Off the top, but I speak from my heart, and we did it since the start. Every day, a slave to delinquency, but they don't know what I feel, driven by the truth that's inside of me.
So as an example here for this project, I had released this song Off the Wall as a single a little while ago before it actually ended up on my album. And so when I came to do the master for the entire album, this song was just not quite as bright as the rest of the tracks that I did in terms of tonality. So what I did was I went to the SSL Fusion, which I use as a stereo bus processor most of the time, or a mastering processor, just to give me some analog flair and color. And I went there and I just used the Violet EQ here and just boosted at 20K, which just added some air. And then when I went back to, play this track, the high end was much closer to the rest of the project. So again, it's just very small strokes like that that are going to be making a huge difference in terms of creating consistency and making sure that this thing sounds like a project, not just a bunch of songs thrown together. Another trick that will make that easier in terms of getting the tonality correct is to use a match EQ. So Ozone has match EQ within this, and what this will allow you to do is just capture the EQ curve of one of your songs. Say you wanted to base it off of your single or whatever, and then you can use that to create a custom curve that'll adjust the frequency spectrum of your other songs. Now, what I would say about this is you want to do a really fine amount on that. Each of your songs is going to have a unique curve to it, and we don't want to mess that up. We want them to stand on their own because no song is the same. But to create that consistency, you want to just adjust the intensity of that EQ match to be very subtle. And then again, that's just going to create a little bit of a similarity in terms of the overall frequency spectrum for your masters. So once you've got the levels as well as the frequency curves, the tonality of your songs all matched, you really want to get in here and get your hands dirty and just make sure to remove any dead space, significant dead space that doesn't need to be there in terms of the start of the song. And this also goes for the outros. Don't leave a big blank space unless it needs to be there. For instance, this was a track that I wanted to have a little bit of air before the next song came in. And I'm going to show you in just a second how we can start thinking about sequencing your songs for mastering as far as the album goes and the arrangement of the tracks. But leave some space if it feels right before going into another track. But get rid of any excessive stuff, and you can go in here and go ahead and start adding some nice fades. You can either automate the volume on the output, just go ahead and add you a nice little fade there if you need to for any of the songs, or you can just use a fade tool and just go ahead and put a nice little curve on there just to make sure that that's nice and clean on all of your tracks. So once your masters are completed, you're going to be exporting to the final format, the final version that's going to be uploaded for distribution. I get a lot of questions about what should you upload at, and what I like to consider is just where is the file in terms of in its current state at its highest quality. So these are all bounced into a session at 24-bit 44K. So that's what I'm going to bounce out in master. I want to keep the quality as high as it can be in terms of where the file is already at that point. Most of these are going to end up at 44K 16-bit anyway when you're distributing through most of the platforms. But again, just keep that fidelity and make sure and keep these consistent as well. You want all the tracks to, for the most part, be the same format if you can manage to. One other thing to add, I know people ask, should you master your tracks in a separate session like this with individual mixed wave files, which is what I did in this case, or should you, use the actual sessions, the mixing sessions, and then just do the mastering in there? My answer to that question is my personal preference is if I mixed the song, I like to just go ahead and do the mastering in that session because then I have, control over the individual elements. If I need to, just correct a clap rather than using, multi-band compression across the master, which is really not the ideal thing if all I need to do is turn down the clap. I would rather do that. So I like being able to do that, although it is, a little bit more efficient, resource savvy to, just have bounced waves and then do them all in a separate session in terms of the mastering goes. But again, this is all personal preference. It's however you want to do it. All right, so once they're all bounced, I like to go into iTunes or, whatever music player that you prefer, Windows Media Player, whatever. Just bring in the final files, and then this is where I start experimenting with sequencing your album in terms of the track order. So this is more for the artists out there, or those of you who are releasing your own music. You want to just go ahead and just kind of play these songs back to back. And again, like I talked about at the beginning of the video, we want the album to kind of feel like a story. There's no rules here. Some people like to put some of the singles or, the songs they're going to be pushing more heavily to be up front. It's totally up to you, whatever feels right. But I like mine to just kind of flow really naturally. So what I'll do is I'll just play the outros, and then I'll let them play into the next song just to make sure that it feels right. So let's just do that.
Get up out of here.
My flow is off the wall.
All right, so we're listening to, all that space on the end of it. We're just making sure that there's a nice fade, perfect transition into the next song. And then again, also considering just how does it feel coming out of that song going into the next one. So again, these are just things that you want to consider. This is not necessarily, the duty of a mastering engineer, but definitely things that you want to be considering either way. And especially if you're releasing your own music, you're going to have to do this. And this is certainly going to be an important part of the final process of getting your album ready to be distributed. All right, so your masters are finished. They're exported. They're consistent in terms of level. They've got similar tonality, dynamics. The sequence is all set up the way you want it to. It's time to get this thing out to the world. So a lot of you ask me, what do I prefer in terms of distribution? I use a service called DistroKid. And this is just a very, very nice user interface. You can upload all of your lyrics. You can add your credits. You can do things like choose which stores you want this to be distributed to. So if for some reason you didn't want it on a certain platform, you can uncheck that. All kinds of cool tools. You can set your release dates, even have a pre-order available. I just really like the way that DistroKid is set up. It gives you full stats. You can track your royalties, all that kind of stuff. And it's all just very seamless in terms of how you're able to do this. So I will put a link below if you guys want to check out DistroKid if you're interested in finding a distribution platform. The cost is very reasonable. But as soon as you submit that, then it's going to be out to the world. And again, like we talked about before, a lot of you ask, well, after I deliver my song, why does it sound quieter on the streaming platforms? That's because of the normalization that's happening, the consistency they're trying to create for the listener in terms of level. But if you go into the settings of any of your platforms, Spotify or Apple Music, and you turn off what's called normalization or loudness consistency, there's different names for it. I'm going to put a link to a video that covers this more in depth, but that will let you hear the song as it was delivered. And that's going to be, how your listeners are going to get it if they get it from iTunes or they're downloading the actual file. Don't worry so much about it being slightly quieter or, a little bit quieter than what you deliver on the platforms. That's the way it should be. Don't panic. All right, y'all. So those are my tips for mastering an album or an EP like a pro, really creating consistency, cohesiveness, and an experience for your listener that is going to, really just bring home the fact that this is a body of work. This is not just, songs thrown together and have an album name. You really want this to be an experience for the listener, and you want everything to sound like it has a place on the project. And there's nothing that's going to throw you off whenever you turn to it throughout. I hope this is helpful for y'all. If you have any questions about mastering an album, feel free to leave a comment below. If you learned anything in the video, please like, subscribe, and consider sharing. We'll talk to you soon.
Shows. You can take the credit, man. I do it for my subs, though. If you don't have the man up above and your heart for the love, it was all you see. I kept falling deep in the cracks and swiftly found that it ain't about me. Creeping through the city, people hurting, man, you never know. Some of us falling deep into depression, but we're back for more. Just a freestyle to vent.